In the spring of 1925, a man sold the Eiffel Tower. Not a replica. Not a painting. Not a postcard. The actual Eiffel Tower. For scrap metal. And then, because the first buyer was too embarrassed to go to the police, he came back to Paris 6 weeks later and sold it again. His name was Victor Lustig. And by the time the United States government finally caught him, he had conned his way across 2 continents, forged millions of dollars in currency, and outwitted the FBI for years. This is the story of the greatest con man who ever lived. Paris, 1925. The city is rebuilding after the devastation of World War I. There's money in the air, new money, anxious money. Businessmen from across Europe and America are flooding into the French capital, looking for deals, opportunities, and a taste of the glamour that Paris still promised even in its battered state. The Eiffel Tower itself is in poor shape. Built in 1889 as a temporary structure for the World Exhibition, it was never meant to last. By 1925, Parisian newspapers are openly discussing whether the tower has become an eyesore, a rusting embarrassment in the heart of the city. The cost of maintaining it is enormous. Rumors swirl that the city may finally tear it down and sell the iron for scrap. Into this environment walks a man traveling under the name Robert Miller. He is impeccably dressed. He speaks with an aristocratic air. He carries himself with the quiet authority of someone who does not need to impress anyone because everyone already knows how important he is. He checks into the Hôtel de Crillon, one of the most exclusive hotels in Paris, and begins making phone calls. Robert Miller, it seems, is a senior official in the French Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs. And he has a very sensitive proposition for a select group of Paris's most successful scrap metal dealers. Lustig sent official-looking letters on convincing government stationery to 5 of the most prominent scrap metal dealers in Paris. The letters were discreet. Confidential. The matter was delicate and could not be discussed publicly. Each man received an invitation to a private meeting at the Hôtel de Crillon. The 5 dealers arrived separately, each believing they were one of a small, privileged group. They were escorted to a private dining room. Lustig entered wearing a government overcoat, accompanied by a fake secretary taking notes. He laid out the situation gravely. The Eiffel Tower, he explained, had become a financial burden the French government could no longer sustain. The maintenance costs were astronomical. Public opinion was turning against the structure. The decision had been made at the highest levels: the tower would be dismantled, and the 7,000 tons of iron would be sold for scrap. This was, he stressed, extremely sensitive information. A public announcement would cause outrage. The government needed to move quietly, quickly, and discreetly. Which was why they had approached private businessmen rather than going through official channels. The scrap value? Enormous. The opportunity? Once in a lifetime. He invited each man to submit a confidential bid. Now, pause here for a moment. Because you might be thinking, wouldn't these businessmen be suspicious? Wouldn't they verify the story? Here's what Lustig understood about human psychology that most people never learn. The larger the lie, the easier it is to believe. These men were successful, intelligent businessmen. But they were also human. And humans, when presented with an extraordinary opportunity backed by apparent authority and social proof, do not think clearly. The hotel. The stationery. The other credible-looking men in the room. The air of secrecy. The government overcoat. Every detail reinforced the story. There was also something else Lustig did brilliantly: he chose his mark. One of the 5 dealers, a man named André Poisson, was newer to Paris's business scene. He was wealthy but slightly insecure, eager to prove himself among the established elite. Lustig spotted this immediately. Over the following days, he paid particular attention to Poisson. Arranged private meetings. Made him feel special. Chosen. Lustig even did something counterintuitive, something that sealed the deal. He let Poisson catch him asking for a bribe. In a private meeting, Lustig leaned in and explained awkwardly that his government's salary was not what it should be. That facilitating this arrangement involved personal risk. That he would need something to make it worth his while, off the books. This moment of apparent corruption was, paradoxically, the thing that made Poisson believe everything was real. Because crooked officials ask for bribes. Legitimate-sounding stories don't have that texture of human weakness. Poisson thought, this is how the real world works. He's a real person, asking for real money, in a way that makes him vulnerable to me. This has to be genuine. André Poisson paid the bribe. And then he paid for the Eiffel Tower. The total, approximately 70,000 francs, worth around $50,000 in 1925 dollars. Millions by today's value. Lustig took the cash, handed over a fake deed of sale and a set of official-looking government documents, and left Paris that night. André Poisson went to take possession of his new property. You can imagine the moment it unraveled. The real authorities. The real officials. The confusion. The documents that meant nothing. He had been robbed. And here is where the con becomes something almost unbelievable. Poisson never went to the police. Think about that. A man had just defrauded him out of the equivalent of millions of dollars, and he said nothing. Why? Because the humiliation would have been unbearable. Can you imagine the headlines? Paris scrap dealer buys Eiffel Tower. Pays good money. Gets receipt. His reputation. His standing. His business relationships. All of it would have been destroyed by the laughter alone. So he stayed quiet. And Lustig, who had been carefully watching the Paris newspapers from Vienna, where he'd fled, realized something extraordinary. There were no reports. No police alerts. No manhunt. He had gotten away with it completely. So he came back. 6 weeks later, Victor Lustig returned to Paris. New hotel. New alias. New set of 5 carefully selected scrap metal dealers. New letters on new stationery. He sold the Eiffel Tower a second time. This buyer, however, did go to the police. Which finally put Lustig on the radar of French authorities. But by then, he was already gone. Victor Lustig, whose real identity remained a mystery for years, had been born in Bohemia in 1890. His real name was unknown even to many of his associates. Over the course of his career, he used at least 47 aliases and carried 24 false passports. He was a genius linguist, fluent in 5 languages. He had studied at the finest schools. He could have been anything. He chose to be a con man. Before the Eiffel Tower, he had spent years working the transatlantic steamship routes, running card games and confidence schemes on wealthy American passengers crossing between New York and Europe. It was there that he developed what he called the 10 Commandments of the Con Man, a list he actually wrote down and shared. Be a patient listener. Never look bored. Wait for the other person to reveal any political opinions, then agree with them. Let the other person reveal religious views, then have the same ones. Hint at sex talk but never follow through unless the other person insists. Never discuss illness unless some special concern is shown. Never pry into a person's personal circumstances. Never boast, just let your importance be quietly obvious. Never be untidy. Never get drunk. 10 rules. Ruthlessly effective. Used with precision on every mark. After the Eiffel Tower, Lustig moved to the United States permanently. And he ran his most audacious scheme yet. He invented a money printing machine. The Romanian box, he called it. A handsome mahogany box with a slot at each end. Lustig would feed in a genuine $100 bill and a blank piece of paper. 6 hours later, he'd explain this was due to the complex chemical process inside. Another $100 bill would emerge from the other end. He would demonstrate this for marks. A real $100 bill goes in. 6 hours pass. A real $100 bill comes out. And it worked. Because Lustig had preloaded several genuine bills inside the box before the demonstration. He sold these boxes for $10,000 to $30,000 each. By the time the buyer discovered the box only printed real money for about 24 hours, just long enough for Lustig to disappear, he was long gone. But then came the most dangerous move of his career. Victor Lustig decided to con Al Capone. He approached the most powerful and violent criminal in America with a guaranteed investment scheme. He asked Capone for $50,000, promising to double it in 2 months. Capone gave him the money. Lustig then did nothing. He put the $50,000 in a bank vault and waited. 2 months later, he returned to Capone. The investment, he said, regretfully, had fallen through. He handed back the full $50,000 untouched. Capone, impressed by the man's apparent honesty, gave Lustig $5,000 as a reward for returning his money intact. Lustig had borrowed $50,000 from the most dangerous man in America, kept it safely, and walked away with $5,000 in profit. The con was, there was no con. And yet somehow that was the con. The U.S. Secret Service had been hunting Lustig for years, not for his confidence schemes, but for counterfeiting. In the early 1930s, Lustig had partnered with a master engraver and begun producing some of the most accurate counterfeit $100 bills ever printed. At the operation's peak, he was flooding the American economy with fake currency at a scale that genuinely alarmed the government. He was finally caught in 1935, not through brilliant detective work, but through the jealousy of a woman he had promised to leave his wife for. She tipped off the Secret Service. Lustig was arrested. He escaped from a federal detention center, his only known escape, by tearing his bedsheets into a rope, climbing out a window, and then casually walking the streets of New York for weeks before being recaptured. He was convicted of counterfeiting and sentenced to 20 years in Alcatraz. He died there in 1947, of pneumonia. He was 57 years old. His death certificate listed his occupation as apprentice salesman. So what do we make of Victor Lustig? He was, by any measure, a criminal who caused real harm. His counterfeit currency damaged real people's savings. His schemes ruined businesses. His charming exterior concealed a man utterly without conscience. But there's a reason his story has endured for a century. Lustig understood something fundamental about human beings that most of us spend our whole lives trying not to admit. We believe what we want to believe. When an opportunity appears that matches our desires, our greed, our ambition, our longing to be chosen, we don't apply skepticism. We apply creative reasoning in favor of saying yes. The scrap metal dealers weren't stupid. They were human. The lesson isn't don't trust anyone. The lesson is, the moment something makes you feel specially selected for an opportunity that others don't know about, stop. That feeling of being chosen is often the exact tool being used against you. It was true in 1925. It is true right now. In fact, some of the most successful scams happening today use Lustig's exact same psychology, just over email and social media instead of hotel stationery. We'll cover those in a future episode. For now, if you've made it this far, you clearly love this stuff as much as I do. Subscribe. I post every Friday with a new case. And drop your theories in the comments, I read every single one. What do you think? Could you have spotted Victor Lustig's con in real time? Or would the Hotel de Crillon and the government overcoat have been enough for you? See you next Friday.